Senator Obama, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Pretty exciting to come back to Iowa because a lot of people think this is where it all started for you.
Well, especially when it's 70 degrees outside in late October. I'm really happy to come back to Iowa.
It's warmer here than it is back in New York or Washington.
But no, it felt really good to see all these familiar faces. There were a bunch of people out here who signed up for our campaign when we had almost no money, very few endorsements. The polls weren't good for us, and a lot of these people took a chance. They came up and volunteered, put their names on my campaign.
Iowa showed that a black man can really get a lot of white people's support.
Well, I think that's part of what it showed, but what it also showed, I think you'll remember, because you were watching, a lot of people were skeptical about young people coming out, about people who traditionally haven't participated in caucuses getting involved. And here's where we, I think, proved that we can get people much more engaged in the political process than they have been before.
Let's go through a whole bunch of substantive economic issues, foreign policy issues. I'm going to give you quick questions. If you can give me quick answers, I think we'll get through a lot. We got limited time, as you know. You want universal health care or something approaching universal health care. That's a top priority. Where is the money going to come from?
Well, we're going to have to cut back on some things that don't make sense right now. We're spending $15 billion a year, for example, under the Medicare program to subsidize insurance companies. We're going to have to cut from programs that don't work in order to provide health care. And as I've said before, we're going to roll back the Bush tax cuts on the wealthiest Americans, people making over $250,000 a year, especially millionaires and billionaires, who've been making much more than that.
So in effect, that will pay for the health care?
That will pay for the health care.
What about the war in Iraq? You're going to want to stop that war as well, right?
The war in Iraq, we can achieve some significant savings. It's not going to come immediately. I've said I want a responsible drawdown. We're still going to have to reset our military. We're still going to have to deal with rising veterans costs. Post-traumatic stress disorder, for example, I think has been underdiagnosed. We've got to make sure treatment.
So the $12 billion the United States is spending a month right now on Iraq, that's going to go on at least for what, a year or a year and a half?
My hope is that we draw down that money over time is drastically reduced. But the point is that we're not going to be able to take that $12 billion and suddenly automatically apply it all to domestic stuff. We've got to take care of our troops. And we're still going to have expenditures in Afghanistan because we need to hunt down bin Laden and al-Qaeda and put them finally out of business.
Senator McCain says if he's president, he will veto every piece of legislation that has pork barrel spending or earmarks. Will you make that same commitment?
You know, here's what I'll tell you. We're going to have to fundamentally change how our appropriations process works. And I want to sit down with members of Congress, should I be elected, even before I'm sworn in, and explain to them that some of these projects may be worthy projects in their home state, home district, but right now we can only do those things that are absolutely necessary. And if we're going to have a project, I think it has to be not just a whim of a particular local community. It's got to be something that serves to help build the overall economy and move us in a better direction.
At a time of economic crisis, as it is right now, the worst since the Great Depression, people want to know who you'll be surrounded with on these important decisions. Who do you think will be your Secretary of the Treasury?
Well, I'm not going to make that kind of news because...
Give me an example of the folks that you're thinking about.
I haven't won yet, but I'll tell you who is already part of my senior economic advisory group, because you've seen him. Paul Volcker, former Federal Reserve Board chairman. Larry Summers, former Secretary of the Treasury. Warren Buffett, who's been a great friend and a great advisor and talked to me a lot during this recent economic crisis. Those are the kinds of people that I expect will surround me, will help me make decisions, but it's getting ahead of ourselves for me to identify particular cabinet posts.
Will you raise the capital gains tax, the tax where people sell stocks or mutual funds, their 401ks? Will you raise it from 15%, that capital gains tax?
I have said early in this campaign that it makes sense for us to go from 15 to 20%. Now, frankly, people aren't experiencing a lot of capital gains right now. People are having a lot of capital losses. But I've talked to people like Warren Buffett and asked him, will that modest increase in the capital gains tax have an impact on the real economy, on investment, on business growth? And he assures me that's not going to be an impediment to capital formation and us being able to move forward on the economy.
Will middle-class families be exempted from that increase in capital gains tax?
Well, what I've said is small businesses are going to be exempted, and anybody who's making less than $250,000 a year, I've said they're not going to get their capital gains tax increase.
So they will be exempted.
They will be exempted from that, as well as any income tax increase, any payroll tax increase. My attitude is that middle-class families need a tax cut, and 95% of American families and workers are going to get reduced taxes. In fact, you know, there was an article today in the New York Times that laid out in very stark terms the fact that I give much more tax relief to middle-class families than John McCain does.
At a time of economic distress, is it wise to increase the corporate tax rate?
Well, we're not increasing the corporate tax rate.
I know, but there's some talk that you want to increase it. It's 35% right now. You've talked about that in the past.
Where's that talk coming from?
I don't know. I mean, you tell me. You want to keep it at 35%?
I have no plans for increasing the corporate tax rate. And in fact, you can make an argument for lowering the corporate tax rate, but only if you, at the same time, close all the corporate loopholes. The problem we have right now is, on paper, we've got a high corporate tax rate. In actual terms, corporations aren't paying their fair share.
ExxonMobil will still pay 35%, is that right?
ExxonMobil will still pay 35%, although I've talked about previously the idea that we should have a windfall profits tax, similar to the one that Sarah Palin imposed on oil companies to benefit Alaska.
If you're elected president, still a big if right now, when would you shut down Gitmo, the Guantanamo naval base where the detention center for suspected terrorists is?
I want to close Gitmo as quickly as we can do.
What does that mean? How quickly?
As quickly as we can do prudently. And I am not going to give a time certain, because I think what we have to do is evaluate all those who are still being held at Gitmo. We have to put in place appropriate plans to make sure that they are tried, convicted, and punished to the full extent of the law. And that's going to require, I think, a review of the existing cases, which I have not had the opportunity to do.
Senator McCain says that if he's elected president, Iran will not become a nuclear power. Can you make that same commitment?
Well, I've said I will do everything in my power to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. I think it would be a game changer. It would not be acceptable. It would be a threat to our strongest ally in the region, Israel. But it would also potentially trigger a nuclear arms race in the region. And we have to both apply much tougher diplomacy and sanctions potentially if they do not move in a better direction. We have to give them some inducements to walk away from their nuclear program. And we should never take a military option off the table.
If you're elected president, would you support direct talks with the Taliban in Afghanistan?
You know, I know that General Petraeus has discussed the possibility of trying to peel away more moderate factions within the Taliban. And I think that talking to our commanders on the ground and based on sound intelligence, if we can peel off some support from the hardcore militants that are aligned with al-Qaeda, that would be beneficial. I don't think that we necessarily are the best intermediary in that kind of discussion. And I'd want to see some proof, some evidence that in fact there are aspects of the Taliban that are susceptible to reasonable dialogue.
Because, as you know, this is the group that gave aid and comfort to al-Qaeda.
Well, and that's exactly my point. My general attitude is that we have to snuff out al-Qaeda, we have to capture or kill bin Laden, and in order for us to do that, we're going to have cooperation from Afghans and Pakistanis, but you know, it may get murky in terms of who are potential allies, who are enemies in that situation. I want to work with our commanders to do whatever practically we can do in order to make sure that the overall goal of eliminating al-Qaeda as a threat is accomplished.
The model that General Petraeus used in Iraq to wean away Iraqi Sunni insurgents from al-Qaeda, it seems to have worked in the Al-Anbar province and elsewhere. Is that model applicable in weaning away Taliban elements from al-Qaeda in Afghanistan?
I think it is important to understand that these countries are all different. That's one of the mistakes we made going into Iraq. We have to, I think, analyze very specifically what the situation is there before we make any moves. And I will expect, if I'm the president-elect, to have some very rapid discussions with General Petraeus, who I think has done a very good job in Iraq. I want to get his assessment, and I would want to see some evidence that, in fact, the possibility of that model working existed in Afghanistan.
As you know, he was he took charge today, even as we're speaking, of the U.S. Military Central Command, which oversees that entire region. You have confidence in him, and you want him to stay.
I do have confidence in him. I think he did an outstanding job in Iraq, as our military generally has done outstanding work. What they need is a commander-in-chief who is thinking more strategically about how we deploy our resources to make America more secure. I look forward to working alongside our commanders and our troops on the ground in order to make sure that we are going after al-Qaeda, we're getting bin Laden, that we stabilize Iraq, that we create a situation in Afghanistan where this ongoing threat is not constantly coming back at us.
Senator McCain says he knows how to capture bin Laden, and he says, I'll